My grandfather, a millionaire farmer, found out that I was working two jobs to help pay the household bills while my mom and brother lived as if they were the rich ones in the story. The moment he discovered the truth, he immediately cut off my mom's allowance and did something unbelievable for me. Before the story begins, if you like our channel, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And now, we invite you to enjoy a story with an unexpected ending. Have you ever felt like you were carrying a burden that wasn't yours? That no matter how much effort you put in, it was never acknowledged? That was my life. My name is Ethan. I'm 21 years old, and I live with my mom, Carla, and my younger brother, Jake, who's 18. Our house wasn't luxurious, but it wasn't modest either. The thing is, despite all the comfort we had, I was the one actually keeping the bills paid. I've been working nonstop since I was 16. At first, it was just a part-time job to help with small expenses. But over time, I realized my mom and brother were spending way more than we could afford. Designer clothes, fancy dinners, trips. Meanwhile, I was covering part of the basic bills while they lived like millionaires. The most infuriating part? My grandfather, Richard, a millionaire farmer and one of the most respected men in the area, sent my mom a generous allowance every month. Money that was supposed to be used for the household, for our stability. But none of it ever reached me. She just squandered it, acting like the money would never run out. Meanwhile, I left early and came home late, juggling two jobs, a cafe during the day and a warehouse at night. I barely slept, studied whenever I could, and still had to hear my mom complain that I wasn't present enough at home. And Jake? He was always the golden boy of the family. Never had to lift a finger. He drove a car that wasn't even his, partied all the time, and looked at me with disdain every time he saw me leaving for work. "Why are you killing yourself like this? Money always shows up, man," he'd say, laughing, while holding a brand new phone that, surprise, was bought with my grandfather's allowance. I felt invisible. I was the only one who actually cared about keeping the house afloat, while my mom and brother acted like they were living in some rich fantasy. But all of that was about to change. And when my grandfather found out the truth, nothing would ever be the same again. The alarm rang at 5 a.m. I got up in the dark, put on my worn-out clothes, and went straight to my first job at the town's cafe. Meanwhile, my mom and brother were still fast asleep in their warm bedrooms, without a single worry in the world. I had already gotten used to that exhausting routine. I arrived at the cafe before the sun even came up, baked bread, served customers, and cleaned tables. After that, I rushed to college, trying to stay focused in class, even as exhaustion weighed me down. By the end of the day, with no time to rest, I headed to the warehouse for my night shift, spending hours lifting heavy boxes and organizing inventory. And for what? To come home and see my mom sprawled out on the couch, watching TV on a massive screen I didn't even know we owned. To see my brother posting pictures of expensive dinners with his friends while I counted my spare change just to buy my own food. It was like I was living in a parallel reality. Every cent of my paycheck went toward rent, electricity, and gas bills, while my mom spent Grandpa Richard's allowance on pointless luxuries. There was never anything left for me. One time I asked her for some of the money my grandfather sent, just enough to help cover my college books. She laughed in my face. "You have two jobs, Ethan. Figure it out." That was the moment I realized that to her I wasn't a son. I was just an unpaid worker in that house. My brother Jake never missed an opportunity to mock me either. "You work like a slave and still have nothing, man. Learn from us. Life is meant to be enjoyed, not suffered." He said that the day he showed up wearing a brand new pair of designer sneakers that cost more than my entire paycheck. That infuriated me. I was the one keeping part of the house afloat while they acted like money fell from the sky. But I swallowed my anger and kept quiet. What else could I do? But life has a strange way of balancing things out. What I didn't know was that this injustice wouldn't stay hidden forever. Someone was about to uncover the truth, and that person would change my life forever. Life has a funny way of setting things right, I would have never had the courage to tell Grandpa Richard the truth, not because I wanted to protect my mom and brother, but because I knew no one would believe me. After all, who would believe that the woman he had been supporting for years was letting her own son work himself to exhaustion while she squandered his money? But fate decided to step in. It all happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was at the cafe as usual, serving customers and washing cups behind the counter. My shift was almost over when I heard a familiar voice. "Ethan?" I froze. My heart pounded. It was my grandfather. He never came to town. He had always preferred the peace of his farm where he spent his days managing his land and running his business. Seeing him there, standing in the cafe doorway with his imposing presence and piercing gaze, made me feel like I had just been caught doing something wrong. He slowly walked closer, looking me up and down. My coffee-stained apron, my tired eyes, my hands, rough and cracked from hard work. "What are you doing here, kid?" I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "Working, Grandpa." He frowned, as if that didn't make any sense to him. "You have a job?" "Two." His expression shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally, anger. He pulled out a chair and sat down in front of me. He didn't look like he was planning to leave any time soon. "Explain." "Now?" I had never seen him this serious. I took a deep breath. My whole body was trembling. I didn't want to say it, but I knew this was my chance. So, I told him everything. I told him how my mom burned through the money he sent, how my brother never had to lift a finger, how I worked 2 jobs just to help cover the bills while they lived in luxury. My grandfather stayed silent, just listening. His face was unreadable, his hands clasped together on the table. When I finished, he closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Then he said just one sentence. "This ends now." He stood up, tossed some bills onto the counter, and walked out without another word. I had no idea what he was going to do, but I knew that from that moment on, my life would never be the same. I went home that night with a heavy weight on my chest. What was Grandpa going to do? The whole way back, I tried to imagine the possibilities. Would he confront my mom? Would she be able to manipulate him like she always did? When I walked into the house, I saw my mom and Jake in the living room, laughing while watching TV. The same scene as always. Nothing had changed. They had no idea what was about to happen. And then, the phone rang. My mom answered with that sweet fake tone she only used with my grandfather. "Daddy, what a surprise. How are you?" I stood in the hallway, listening. Seconds later, her smile vanished. "What? What do you mean you're cutting off my allowance?" Jake paused the TV and turned around confused. I held my breath. So that was it. Grandpa hadn't wasted any time. "Dad, this is ridiculous. I have bills to pay. How do you expect us to live without that money?" She looked at me, with hatred, as if she already knew I had something to do with this. "I know exactly who put these ideas in your head," she said into the phone, glaring at me. "That ungrateful brat, Ethan." I felt my blood boil. Ungrateful? Me? After everything I had done? She kept trying to argue. But it was no use. For the first time in her life, my grandfather wasn't falling for her manipulation. When she hung up, she threw the phone onto the couch and stood up. "What did you do, Ethan?" I took a deep breath. It was time to say it all. What did I do? I just told the truth. You've been taking Grandpa's money for years, living like a queen while I've been working 2 jobs to keep this house running. She looked at me like she wanted to kill me. You ruined everything. No, Mom. You did that. Jake, who had been silent until now, scoffed and rolled his eyes. Big deal, Ethan. You really think he's going to cut off the money forever? This won't last. But before my mom could say another word, the doorbell rang. We walked to the door. It was Grandpa. He had never come to our house before. Not once. He always insisted that visits happen at the farm, where he had control over everything. But there he was, standing at our door, wearing his cowboy hat, a serious expression on his face. My mom forced a smile. "Dad, please, let's talk." He raised his hand, cutting her off. The silence was heavy. "I'm not here to argue, Carla. I'm here to get Ethan." I blinked, confused. "What?" He looked at me, steady and firm. "Grab your things, kid. You're not spending another day in this place." My mom's eyes widened. "What? You wasted everything I ever gave you. You lived off me without ever working a single day. And now, I find out that the only person in this house who understands the value of hard work is Ethan? Well then, he's coming with me." The shock was so overwhelming that my mom couldn't even react. Jake was speechless. I didn't know what to say. But for the first time in my life, someone saw me. For the first time, someone truly saw me. And at that moment, I knew. My life was about to change forever. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of my mother's heavy breathing. She was speechless. For the first time, she didn't have a quick response, a manipulation ready on the tip of her tongue. "This is ridiculous," she finally shouted. "You can't just take Ethan, Dad. He lives here." Grandpa stood firm. He lived here because he thought it was his responsibility to support this household. But that's not his job. Ethan deserves more. Those words hit me hard. I deserved more. For so long I had believed it was my responsibility to keep the bills paid, that my mom and Jake were entitled to that money while I had to fend for myself. But the truth was I had just been exploited. My mom kept trying to argue, but Grandpa wasn't budging. He turned to me and said calmly, "Are you coming with me or not, kid?" At that moment I looked at my mom and Jake. They just stood there, expressionless, as if it had finally hit them that their easy money was gone. I could have hesitated. I could have felt sorry for them. But for the first time in my life, I thought about myself. "I'm going." My mom's eyes widened. "Ethan, no. You can't do this to me." Jake scoffed and crossed his arms. "Big deal. What, you're gonna be a farmer now?" Grandpa smirked. "A farmer? A businessman? A landowner? Unlike you, Jake, Ethan's going to have a real future." I went upstairs, grabbed my few belongings, and walked out without looking back. When I got into Grandpa's truck, I felt something I had never felt before. Relief. For the first time, I was free. The next few days were a whirlwind. Grandpa didn't waste any time. Not only did he take me to the farm, but he also made me an incredible offer. "You've always worked hard, Ethan. I see that in you, and I need someone like that by my side." Then he gave me the opportunity to manage part of his land. Not just a job, but a chance to learn, to grow, and maybe one day to own it all. I accepted without hesitation. In the months that followed, my life completely changed. For the first time, I had a purpose. I didn't have to work myself to exhaustion to fund someone else's luxuries. Now I was working, for me. And my mom and Jake? Well, without Grandpa's allowance, things got tough for them. My mom tried to keep up the same lifestyle, but she quickly realized that money didn't just appear out of thin air. She had to get a job, for the first time in years. Jake, stripped of his usual comforts, was forced to face reality. And he hated it. I tried not to care, but deep down, I knew. He was just reaping what he had sown. Today, I'm a different man. I'm not that kid who silently accepted being taken advantage of. I learned my worth. And thanks to my grandfather, I got the chance to change my story. The best part? I never had to look back. This story is about more than just family and justice. It's about recognizing your own worth and understanding that no one deserves to live in someone else's shadow. If you've ever been through something like this, know this. No one has the right to exploit you. You deserve better. You deserve respect. And sometimes all it takes is one opportunity to change everything.